I was slumped on the couch in my new apartment in Atlanta, holding a mug of almost cold coffee, while my phone buzzed on the coffee table like it was about to explode. Same names flashing on the screen. Dad, Mom, Brandon, calls, texts, voice messages. A silent bombardment I just let happen without moving a muscle. 6 months had gone by since I walked out of that house without saying a word, and now, after all that silence, they suddenly remembered I existed. Every notification felt less like a cry of longing and more like a desperate shout from people missing their broken money machine. I didn't turn the phone off. I just sat there staring at the stained ceiling, listening to the constant buzz like an old engine sputtering. And it was on that gray morning, sitting among boxes I hadn't even unpacked yet, that I finally got it. They weren't looking for me. They were trying to get back what they lost. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel guilty. I felt relieved. My name is Daniel Miller. I'm 29 years old. I'm a financial analyst, graduated on a full scholarship from Georgia State University. I've been living and working in Atlanta for a few years now, trying to build a life that, for the first time, was truly mine, even when everything seemed to be pulling me in the opposite direction. When I was 16, while most of my classmates were worried about who to take to prom, I was counting coins just to put gas in the old bike I borrowed from the neighbor. I worked night shifts at a gas station 4 blocks from home, cleaning bathrooms and swapping crumpled bills at the register just to cover the basics without having to ask anyone for help. No one at home ever asked if I was keeping up with school, if I needed a ride after work, or if I had eaten anything besides whatever leftovers were sitting on the stove. Brandon was different. 4 years older than me, he dropped out of art school without warning, came back home, and was welcomed like some returning hero. He was the kind of son who, according to my parents, always deserved another chance. When he wrecked Dad's car because he forgot to change the oil, all you heard were things like, "It happens," and "He's already dealing with enough." Meanwhile, when I landed an after-school internship, all I got was, "Just don't forget that family comes first." Over time, I learned not to expect any recognition. Every one of my achievements was met with a distracted nod, like it was nothing more than my duty. When I ranked first in the city's financial analyst selection process, I didn't even get a congratulations. My dad just asked if the new job would still leave me free on weekends in case they needed a hand around the house. While my friends were celebrating small wins, getting their driver's licenses, buying their first used cars, I learned to measure life by paid bills, favors done, and responsibilities met. Every dollar I saved felt like a battle lost at home, where everything I earned was treated like communal property, up for grabs by whoever could mess up the fastest and the worst. I remember when I got my first bonus at work. It wasn't a huge amount, but to me, it felt like a whole new world opening up. I planned to buy a better computer, maybe even start saving for a future exchange program. That same day, I found a note left on top of the fridge. The fence repair was expensive. See if you can help. No signature, no polite ask. Just an unspoken order, like my paycheck existed solely to patch up problems that weren't mine. Brandon, on the other hand, always had a new excuse. A boss who didn't appreciate him, a project that fell through, a city that didn't offer enough opportunities. And somehow he was still seen as the visionary, the son who just needed more time. Time, money, patience, all things I had to manufacture on my own. I grew up inside that silent imbalance, the son who fixed, covered, carried, and the more I did, the less they seemed to notice. In their eyes, my competence was invisible. My efforts were just the background noise to everyone else's stories. In the end, I wasn't a son. I was just the insurance policy that, in the chaos they created, someone would still keep the house standing. But keeping everyone standing comes at a cost, and sooner or later, I was going to be the only one paying the price. It started almost invisibly, a request to cover the overdue power bill, an emergency deposit to fix my dad's car, an advance for Brandon to take yet another one of those online courses he never finished. At first, I didn't even think twice. That's what family does, I told myself. We help. We hold the line for as long as we can, but without realizing it, that help turned into a routine. What was supposed to be temporary support became a permanent pipeline. Every month brought a new excuse. The fridge broke, the plumbing leaked, the car insurance expired. Every problem came with the unspoken expectation that I would fix it. And I did, without questioning, without delay. It was like part of my paycheck automatically belonged to the house I was trying to keep at arm's length. Meanwhile, the scene back at their house stayed the same. Brandon sprawled on the couch, playing video games in the middle of the week. My dad sitting on the porch, complaining about life's hardships without lifting a finger to change anything. My mom making lists of groceries and repairs, as if managing the collapse was more important than preventing it. The same suffocating routine I was funding without even being asked for an opinion. I kept telling myself it was temporary, that they just needed time, but months turned into years, and the list of requests only grew. With every transfer I made, there came a disguised guilt trip. You're our only hope. Without you, we can't make it. As if the responsibility for everyone's survival was an automatic debt tied to my success. I lost a lot more than money in the process. I missed friends' birthdays because my bonus went to fixing the roof. I skipped trips, missed out on courses, put off investing in myself because Brandon needed another chance, and my parents couldn't be left struggling. Every personal dream was canceled before it even had a chance to take shape. And all of it came with the crushing feeling that sacrificing was just part of the deal. It was a cloudy Sunday, the kind of day when everything feels heavier. I had just finished an extra shift at work, and even though I was exhausted, I still stopped by the grocery store. I bought meat, rice, medicine for my dad, cleaning supplies. Things that, in theory, were no longer my responsibility, but that I still carried to the trunk of my car, as if one more silent delivery could somehow save something. I drove the 40 minutes to my parents' house in silence, watching the empty city roll by through the wet windshield. I wasn't thinking about excuses. I wasn't thinking about fights. I just wanted to drop the bags off in the kitchen and leave before any speeches could start. But life doesn't always stick to our script. As soon as I walked in through the back door, arms full of groceries, I saw my mom standing in the kitchen, arms crossed, her expression hard as stone. "Daniel, we need to talk," she said, not even glancing at what I was carrying. I set the bags down on the table, feeling the weight not just in my hands, but in my back, my head, my soul. "What you send every month isn't enough anymore," she continued, blunt as ever, like someone presenting an overdue bill to a customer who should already know the debt. Before I could even answer, my dad showed up at the doorway, chiming in, "You live alone, you make good money. Meanwhile, we're getting by however we can. Doesn't seem fair that you can't help a little more, right?" That word, fair, kept hammering in my head like a cruel joke. Fair would be everyone carrying their own weight. Fair would have been not giving up a decade of my life to hold together a structure that was already rotting from within. Fair would have been someone, just once, asking if I was holding up. But here I was again, expected to open my wallet and my heart while they stood there, arms crossed. Brandon, sprawled on the couch like always, didn't even bother looking away from the television to join the conversation. He just tossed out a comment, as casually as talking about the weather. "Sharing a little won't kill you, Daniel," he said, not even trying to hide the contempt. I took a deep breath, looked at him, and realized there was nothing left to save here. I was the only one who hadn't accepted the ship was already sinking. I let the bags fall onto the table with a heavy thud. For a second, the noise filled the whole room. My mom's face hardened even more. "If it's such a burden for you," she said, each word like a sentence, "then you can just leave, and don't bother coming back." It wasn't a tantrum. It wasn't a threat. It was a decision. Cold, raw, final. I stood there for a few seconds looking at them. My dad slumped over, too spineless to even defend his own stance. My mom, arms crossed, staring at me like she had already moved on. Brandon still melted into the couch, unable to move toward anything but his own comfort. So I took a deep breath, adjusted my jacket, grabbed my keys, and said, "All right then, I'm leaving." I walked out without raising my voice, without giving a speech, without promising to come back. A light rain started falling just as I closed the door behind me. Each drop felt like it was washing away a little bit of the weight I had carried for years without question. I walked to the car without looking back, without waiting for anyone to stop me, because deep down, I knew no one was going to. And for the first time in a long time, that wasn't something to grieve. It was a sign that I was finally free to become who I needed to be, even if that meant doing it alone. The new apartment was simple, a cramped studio in downtown Atlanta with scratched-up walls and a permanent smell of old wood. But to me, it felt like the most solid palace in the world. For the first time, every square inch of that space was paid for, chosen, and sustained solely by me. No one texting about gas money, roof repairs, or overdue electric bills. Just the echo of my own freedom spreading through the empty rooms. At first, the silence felt strange. I was so used to my phone buzzing at all hours, dealing with problems that were never really mine, that the lack of requests almost made me restless. It felt weird waking up and realizing I could actually use my paycheck for myself, to invest, to save, to splurge on something silly, without having to perform emotional gymnastics to justify every cent that stayed in my account. Money, once treated as an extension of other people's debts, finally started to take root. I opened an emergency fund. I set goals. I signed up for courses I had always put off for the sake of family priorities. What once seemed impossible was now becoming reality, little by little. It wasn't about showing off. It was just the basic right to build something that would last, this time, for me. Over time, I reconnected with parts of myself that had almost been forgotten. I started running again in the evenings, picking up a habit I had abandoned years ago. I got back to playing basketball with old coworkers without having to cancel last minute because something came up at home. I started to relearn what it meant to have a life of my own, without being the firefighter for fires I never lit. But not everything was easy. There were still nights when guilt crept in, disguised as a heavy conscience. I wondered if I was being too harsh, if maybe I should have tried harder to help. If it was cowardice to walk away from people who, even if wrong, were still family. Those questions didn't just disappear. I simply learned not to let them steer me. The calls still came, spaced out, loaded with accusations and empty promises. Brandon talking about his struggles. My mom sending long texts, mixing guilt with nostalgia. My dad trying to appeal to the sense of responsibility they themselves had never practiced. But by then, I could tell the difference between real longing and the kind that just missed having a provider. Rebuilding wasn't about grand gestures or overnight victories. It was about small, quiet, daily choices that nobody else saw. Every polite no, every bill paid without fear, every peaceful evening spent with myself was another brick in the wall that separated me from the cycle that nearly swallowed me whole. For the first time, building something didn't mean carrying everyone else. It was just the beginning, fragile but steady, of my own story. The silence lasted longer than I expected. For a few weeks, life moved on in a strange calm. No messages, no requests, no accusations disguised as concern. It was easy to believe that, finally, they had understood, that everyone would carry their own weight. But part of me, the part that knew those dynamics all too well, knew it was only a matter of time before the next attempt to pull me back into the place I had left behind. The messages started out subtle. Your dad's been worried about the bills. Brandon's trying to start over. Loose phrases, tossed out like fishing lines, waiting for me to bite. I read each one with the bitter calm of someone who no longer feels responsible. I didn't respond. Not because it didn't hurt, but because, this time, I understood their hole was no longer my project to fix. When the soft tactics failed, the tone shifted. The accusations came, heavy and direct, loaded with guilt. You're really going to let the house you grew up in fall apart? After everything we've done for you? Words that once would have made me hesitate, that would have kept me up at night, eaten away by doubt. But now, they just bounced off. Not because I'd gone cold inside, but because I had learned, the hard way, that misplaced empathy is just another chain pulling you under. One rainy night, as I was parking after a long shift, I saw a missed call from Brandon. I ignored it. A few minutes later, a voice message arrived. His voice sharp and cold. If the house falls apart, it's your fault. I played the audio 3 times, not out of disbelief, but because I wanted to cement it in my memory, the final missing piece of the puzzle. The confirmation that, to them, I was never a son. I was always a tool. I sat there in the car, listening to the rain hit the windshield. No rage, no outburst, just a deep, bone-level exhaustion. The kind that only comes when you realize there's no payment big enough for people who only know how to take. That night, I decided I needed to know everything. No space left for assumptions. I opened my laptop and logged into the bank account I used to transfer money for the mortgage. A habit I had carried for years, always trusting the money was being used as promised. I never even considered another possibility. Maybe because deep down I was too scared of what I might find. The screen loaded slowly. Each line of the bank statement felt heavier than the last. And then I saw it. The last time the mortgage had been paid on time was 8 months ago. 8 months. 3 of those months covered by my money, sent religiously, while they pretended everything was still as agreed. My stomach twisted. Not with anger, but with the dull, sick ache of realizing you've been betrayed in the deepest way possible. I spent hours reviewing dates, amounts, receipts, every deposit made through sacrifice, every penny I naively believed was saving the house I grew up in, all of it gone without explanation. The cruel and simple reality: the money I sent was used for anything but what they asked. The next morning, still sleepless, I called the bank. I made up an excuse about helping manage family finances. The clerk, professional and detached, confirmed. The property is at imminent risk of foreclosure. The outstanding balance is critical. No room for doubt. No chance of misunderstanding. The official confirmation of what I already knew deep down. I had been lied to by the people who were supposed to protect me. I hung up and just stared into space. It was hard to find anger. What consumed me was a deep, heavy, dirty sadness. The realization that the bond I spent my whole life trying to maintain was, in truth, just a rope they pulled whenever they needed to keep me close. And worse, a rope I had helped strengthen every time I sent money, thinking I was doing the right thing. It felt like I had been robbed by my own parents. Not in the legal sense, but in the most intimate way, the kind no law can ever touch. They stole my trust. They stole my years. They stole the energy that should have been spent building my own life, and they did it with ease, without shame, without remorse. I spent the whole night awake, staring at the ceiling, letting the memories run wild without filter, every favor given without being asked. Every dream delayed because someone else needed it more. Every text that said just this once and became a never-ending debt. I realized it didn't happen all at once. I had been slowly trained to believe my worth was tied to how much I could fix other people's messes. In the morning, I opened my phone and reread old messages. Words that once sounded legitimate. Just until next month. We're trying, we just need a little push. Now, they sounded like old tricks, tired moves. And every line I read reinforced the decision that was already solid inside me. They would still try to call, try to spin the story, say it wasn't like that there were misunderstandings, that family matters more than resentment. But now I knew. It wasn't a mistake or an accident. It was a choice. And their choice was to use me until there was nothing left. My choice now was to protect whatever was left of myself. That gray morning, as the slow daylight crept through my kitchen window, I made a promise to myself. Never again. No more favors. No more excuses. No more slipping back. The conversation would have to happen, but not to fix anything, to close it for good. I waited all day to make the call, not because I needed courage or wanted to pick the right words. I waited because I had learned, the hard way, that acting in the heat of the moment only prolongs the pain. When I finally dialed the number, I knew this conversation wasn't about fixing anything. It was about ending it, and even with a steady hand, it was impossible to ignore the growing weight in my chest with every ring on the other side. My dad answered with a controlled tone, like someone trying to maintain a facade of normalcy right before an inevitable explosion. "Daniel, we need to talk," he said, as if there was still room for negotiation. I didn't play along. I went straight to it, like ripping off a bandage. "Talk about what, Dad? I've seen everything I needed to see. The bank showed me. The transfers showed me. You don't have to explain. I get it." On the other end, the silence was louder than any excuse. The silence of someone caught, still trying to find a way out with some dignity. My dad tried, of course. "It's not what you think. Things got out of control. The situation became unsustainable." the same old script of poorly stitched excuses used so many times it had become predictable. This time, there wasn't even room for them to get through to me. "You stopped paying the mortgage 8 months ago?" I said, my voice steadier than I felt inside. And even after that, I kept sending money, believing every word, every cry for help. Saying it out loud didn't bring relief. It just confirmed the scar that was already burning. It wasn't just the house falling apart. It was the trust I had tried to hold up all my life. My mom jumped into the conversation the way she always did. Emotional, fast-talking, trying to gain ground by sheer emotion. "Daniel, we were desperate. Your dad was sick. Brandon was out of work. You don't understand what we went through." I closed my eyes for a second, feeling the weight of words that, years ago, would have sent me running to save them. Now, they just echoed like tired tricks from an old playbook. "I do understand," I said, letting the accumulated exhaustion seep through. "I understand that, to you, my success was always an emergency fund. I understand that when the burden got too heavy, it was thrown onto the one person who could carry it. But understanding doesn't mean accepting. Not anymore." My heart was heavy, but my voice didn't waver. I was speaking for someone who, for the first time, wasn't buying into the guilt. Brandon, as expected, jumped in with a jab. "You think you're better than us now, huh? Big man with a steady paycheck." I clenched my fist. If I let those provocations guide the conversation, I'd fall right back into the cycle I promised to break. I took a deep breath before answering. "I'm not better than you. I just learned that carrying everyone on your back isn't a virtue. It's self-destruction." The silence that followed was bitter. It was the sound of realizing they had lost control, of understanding that the cycle had finally been broken. And even though every word I said cut like a knife through my own chest, I knew it was the only way to walk out whole. They would still try to appeal, still try to guilt me. But inside, something had already shifted, and that kind of change doesn't go back. My dad made one last attempt. His voice, which once might have sounded like a genuine plea, now came off as just another hollow tactic. "Son, just give us a little more time. We'll fix it. We just need your help right now." I closed my eyes again, trying to shut out the memories of all the times that "right now" turned into a life sentence. I already knew the answer, but it still hurt to say it. "There's not going to be a right now anymore," I said. "There's not going to be a later. There's not going to be another excuse." The words dropped like stones pulled from the bottom of a river. "You dug this hole, and this time, you're going to have to climb out of it on your own." Every sentence pulled a little more of the boy inside me who had spent years just wanting to be recognized. My mom started to sob on the other end of the line, or at least she tried. It didn't sound raw. It sounded rehearsed, like someone who had learned how to weaponize emotion. Part of me felt the impulse to give in, just like so many times before. But the other part, the part that finally understood the real cost of that dynamic, held steady. I couldn't go back. I couldn't unsee what I had seen. I paused for a few seconds before continuing. I wanted every word to stick, not out of revenge, but out of necessity. "I'm not abandoning you," I said. "I'm giving back the responsibility you kept trying to shove onto me. If the house falls, it's not because I turned my back. It's because you forgot to build the foundation while you had someone holding it all up." They didn't answer right away. Maybe they were hoping I'd backpedal, but I knew if I took one step back now, it would destroy everything I had fought to rebuild inside myself. So, with steady breathing, I finished. "I hope you find a way forward, but for the first time, that path won't go through me." Before any reply could be born, I hung up. Not in anger, not in haste, but with the bitter serenity of someone who knows that surviving sometimes means becoming the villain in someone else's story. And as the phone fell silent in my hand, I finally felt the weight that had been dragging me down for years start to let go. I sat there for a while afterward, staring into the emptiness of the room. I didn't feel euphoria. I didn't feel immediate relief, just a dull, heavy ache mixed with a hint of peace. Because sometimes, winning isn't about coming out unscathed. It's just about moving forward, carrying what needs to be carried, and leaving the rest behind, once and for all. In the first few days after the break, what struck me the most wasn't the relief. It was the silence. The complete absence of messages, calls, or veiled demands. It was like a background noise I had grown too used to had been cut off all at once. Strange at first, then almost addictive. Walking the streets without fearing my phone would buzz with another made-up cry for help felt like learning how to breathe again. But true freedom isn't just peace. It also brings a kind of emptiness you have to learn to face. There were nights when the silence weighed just as much as the old debts used to. My mind, unused to not carrying the burdens of others, would try to invent new ones. I'd wonder if I had been too harsh, if there might have been a way to meet halfway. Guilt doesn't shout. It whispers when you're alone, distracted, vulnerable. Meanwhile, my day-to-day life began to change. Without the monthly black hole of keeping up a house that wasn't mine, I managed to stabilize my finances within a few months. Paid off old debts I'd been rolling over for years. Small victories that, to anyone else, might seem trivial. To me, they were monumental. Concrete signs that, finally, I was building something real under my own feet. But financial freedom was just the surface. The real gain was internal. For the first time, my decisions weren't shaped by the fear of disappointing someone. No expectations were hanging from my neck. If I wanted to travel, I traveled. If I wanted to save, I saved. Every choice, big or small, was made for me, not as a reaction to someone else's needs. In time, the attempts to reconnect started again, first disguised as nostalgia, then returning to the familiar tone of guilt. Are you really going to let the house fall apart? Your dad's getting worse, and you've disappeared. I read every message with the same detachment you read an expired contract. It wasn't ingratitude, it was awareness. Awareness that had come at a very high price. Sometimes, after a long day at work, I still felt the urge to reply, to explain, to justify, to show that my decision wasn't fueled by resentment. But then I'd remember, if you have to explain yourself just to be respected, you've already lost before you even begin. The debt I carried for so long wasn't financial, it was emotional. And that debt, finally, was paid in full. Sitting on the balcony of my apartment, watching the city traffic crawl by below, I often thought about what I had really lost. It wasn't the house, or the money, or the daily contact. It was the illusion that if I gave enough, if I tried hard enough, I would be seen as an indispensable part of that family. Realizing that, deep down, I had only ever been a source of stability for others, that was the wound that took the longest to heal. Friends would sometimes ask if I ever thought about rebuilding the relationship. Sometimes I hesitated. Part of me wanted to believe things could change. But then would come the memory of every manipulative message, every absence masked as affection, every demand that came exactly when I needed support the most. And the answer was always the same. No. The real break doesn't happen when you stop answering a call. It happens when you stop hoping the next call will be different. When you accept that sometimes, letting go is the only way to move forward whole, and not in pieces others pick up only when they need to. They would still try to come back from time to time, changing their tone, making up new stories. But what they would never have again was the version of me that once believed love meant sacrificing everything and asking for nothing in return. The truth is, walking away didn't make me feel lighter overnight. Leaving behind everything you carried for years doesn't magically turn pain into pride. The silence weighs. The doubt gnaws at you. But what weighs even heavier is knowing that if I had stayed, I would have completely lost myself for the sake of a debt that was never mine. They called me ungrateful, selfish, cold. Maybe, to them, that's exactly what I am. Maybe, in their eyes, anyone who refuses to be drained to the very end deserves to be condemned. But today, I understand there's an even greater cost than losing a house or a family. It's losing yourself, and that's a debt I'm no longer willing to pay. Looking back, I know no hard decision comes without scars. But I also know that sometimes, respecting yourself is the only way to move forward without continuing to bleed for other people's choices. No matter how much they try to twist the story, deep down, everyone knows exactly where they failed and where they rose again. Now, I want to hear from you. If you've ever gone through something like this, if you've ever carried the weight of a story that wasn't yours, share it in the comments. Sometimes hearing other voices reminds us we're not as alone as we think. Because sometimes, to truly grow, we have to find the courage to let go of what was only keeping us stuck.